Take a look once again as the gunman who murdered the head of the largest U.S. health insurer appears to have left New York City on a bus shortly after the deadly attack. The New York City Police Department providing those new details, saying it appears the killer left something behind, a backpack you just saw there that was found over in Central Park. Now, the shooter does remain on the run 3 days after UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson was gunned down as he walked from his Midtown Manhattan hotel across the street to the company's annual investor conference. NYPD did say investigators are looking into whether the shooter could have been a disgruntled employee or client of the insurer, but they also added that this does appear to be a targeted attack. Take a look right here as NYPD did release photos of a smiling person they described as a, quote, person of interest wanted for questioning in Thompson's murder, but they stopped short of labeling the person in the pictures as the actual gunman. Video, though, showing the gunman taking off after shooting Thompson, riding a bike to Central Park, then later taking a taxi to a bus terminal that offers commuter service to New Jersey and Greyhound routes to Philadelphia, Boston, and Washington, D.C. The gunman reportedly arriving in New York City on November 24th, 10 days before the shooting. So much to break down and a lot of new details, so I do want to bring in Jillian Snider, a retired NYPD officer. Now, she's also the policy director for our street's criminal justice and civil liberties team and an adjunct lecturer at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Jillian, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us and help break down a very complicated subject here.
Thanks, Josh.
Of course. Well, first off, I want to start with the new information that has come to light here. The NYPD saying it appears that the killer was able to skip town to get out of town here. So how does something like this happen, especially when you're talking about a high-profile crime that happens right there in the middle of the street?
He did this crime early in the morning, and as we've learned thus far, he was here 10 days prior. So he definitely mapped out his escape route from where the shooting took place. NYPD has been on the lookout for any surveillance that might have or gain any details into his pre-planning as well as his escape. But what I think people fail to recognize is as many cameras as we have here in New York City and as much surveillance as we have at our fingertips, it takes countless hours and much manpower to sift through all of that and make sure that we are tracking, in fact, the right individual.
And this is some of the video here. That's actually the backpack there that police say they did recover. Now, I want to ask a little bit about Midtown Manhattan. Can you tell me about the location where the crime happened? Is it an area where we tend to see a lot of crime?
No, this is Midtown Manhattan. This would be in the confines of the Midtown North Precinct. So on its southernmost end, it's 43rd Street. On its northernmost end, it's 59th Street. Or once you pass Grand Army Plaza, that would be Central Park West. It covers from Lexington Avenue on the east side all the way to the Hudson River on its west side. This is where Rockefeller Tree is. This is the theater district. This is where Radio City Music Hall is. A lot of hotels, a lot of great restaurants, a lot of tourism. So the NYPD does put extra effort into an area like this where we want people coming in from outside New York City to enjoy themselves and to feel safe. Overall, we have only seen year to date, and again, this is through December 1st as the NYPD updates its CompStat numbers once a week, we have only seen an increase of 1 occurrence in murders, 1 occurrence in shooting incidents, and 1 occurrence in shooting victims. So that is on par with, the way New York City wants to keep it. It is a relatively safe area. I will admit, however, that robberies and felony assaults in that area have gone up slightly from last year, but the NYPD is taking extra precaution. They are deploying extra officers there, especially now around the holiday season, to make sure people feel safe.
I do have to ask, because NYPD did come out with a lot of information fairly quickly, releasing that to the public, and they made sure to say from the get-go that this appears to be a quote-unquote targeted attack. Why was it so important for police to get that out there and to make mention of that?
So people, their perception is very much influenced by what they see or hear. If we thought as a society that this was just another random act of violence, that would promote a lot of unnecessary fear. And not to say that a crime like this, a calculated, planned in advance, targeted attack like this should not make people extra precautious, but we want the public to understand that this is not a random act of violence. We do not have, individuals who are just crime spree crazed running around New York City and committing acts like this. So I believe the NYPD just wanted to let the public know this was something that an individual took careful time and consideration to plan, to execute, to carry out. And this was, again, not a random act of violence.
And I want to pop up this video once again here. This is, of course, showing the actual shooting. And I want to ask you, as a retired NYPD officer, what does the way the gun is fired tell you about the shooter? Does it tell you anything overall? Because experts have kind of broken that down in a variety of ways over the last several days.
So there's a few things I could immediately point out. The individual seems to be standing in what would be a proper shooting stance. On TV, when you see people shooting firearms, they often don't hold the gun with two hands. They don't hold the gun the proper way. They don't stand, shoulder length apart. But this individual did that. Additionally, as many other people have talked about, he was able to clear phase one, it looks like, malfunctions from that firearm relatively quickly. Now, if you are not proficient in the usage of firearms, it is not always easy to immediately understand why your gun is not firing. And then on top of it, in the moment, while actively trying to shoot someone, he was able to very quickly, very calmly clear what looked to be 3 malfunctions of that firearm. We do see that there is what I believe to be a suppressor, basically a silencer on that front end of that weapon. A lot of times you will see if that silencer was not exactly matched to the firearm type, that's where we're going to see this misfires.
This is kind of an involved question, but I do want to get your take here as a former NYPD officer. When we talk about the fact that it has been about 72 hours since the crime took place, again, this is a high-profile crime. People all over the country are looking for this guy. Does it say anything to you that the crime has not been solved, that the guy's identity has not been released, and that it's possible he hasn't even been identified by police as of now?
So we don't know at this point. We've only seen 2 photos of his face, clear photos of his face. That's what's been publicly released. Those photos actually give us a lot more information than most would guess. There is someone in this country who knows who that person is. And now this is news that is all over the country. So someone knows this individual. But all the other footage that we've seen before and subsequently after the attack, he had a mask on. So the NYPD has to be very careful about how much or how many photos they can release, because we need to ensure that this is in fact the same person. But there's no doubt in my mind that based on that one still shot of that individual smiling and that hostile, someone definitely knows who he is.
And it's interesting because police were also quick to say the photos were of a person of interest rather than the actual suspect. So at this point, they're not necessarily saying that this is the suspect. They're being careful, right, and saying, quote unquote, person of interest wanted for questioning.
There's a legal threshold to elevate someone from a person of interest wanted for questioning or labeling them a suspect. Now, we can call him a person of interest because it's reasonable to assume that this person, fitting the description clothing-wise, staying at the hostel that we believe the shooter stayed at, is in fact definitely a person of interest. But because the shooting took place where he was wearing a mask and then he subsequently fled with a mask on, we have not been able to yet put it 100% factual that this information in this still photo without a mask on is the person who carried out the shooting and subsequently fled.
As far as looking into it a little bit deeper, you kind of talked about this a little bit off the top, but when you're talking about a high-profile case like this and you have people all over the country who are looking for this guy, and again, it happened there in Midtown Manhattan, not an area that sees necessarily a lot of violent crime, do police provide more resources to solving a crime like this than maybe a crime elsewhere or another type of crime?
Yes, again, you said high profile shooting. The NYPD takes every homicide very seriously because of the location and because of who was killed in this attack. Of course, we are going to bring in extra resources. Governor Hochul did lend aid from the state police to allow NYPD to do a proper grid search throughout Central Park, to go out and try and get as much video surveillance as we possibly could from every available bodega, grocery store, ATM machine, bank. And that takes a lot of resources, which the NYPD does not always have because it still needs to protect the rest of the city. But now that this manhunt has gone outside of New York City and it's spread to the rest of the nation, we are now going to be working very closely with the FBI because now it's interstate. This person definitely traveled here from outside of New York, and we believe that he has traveled outside of New York again in his escape. So we will be using interagency resources, which is going to really need to have this high level of communication and collaboration with wherever this bus went or wherever the NYPD believes this bus went. They will have to work with the FBI and then also with those agencies in those jurisdictions to now fan out the surveillance, fan out the investigation, fan out the manhunt, because now we don't have the resources to go south and start looking for him. We're going to need cooperation from neighboring agencies.
NYPD has made a lot of pleas to the public at this point for information. So I want to get your take. How pivotal will the public, those tips, be to solving this crime and finding the killer?
I teach at John Jay College, and I spoke to my students about this yesterday, and they feel very invested. When something like this happens in their city, they want to be involved. They want to be knowledgeable about it, and they want to help, apprehend the bad person in this situation. And I really hope that's the way the rest of the country feels. Someone was killed. That should never happen. And someone now is at large, and law enforcement agencies across the country are trying to identify this person and subsequently capture this person. And it's really going to take a lot from the public to just look at his face. Someone knows him. He was here 10 days prior, so he definitely needed to go buy food, buy rations, go to a drugstore and buy something from CVS or a Walgreens. He had to do something in the 10 days prior to the shooting. And also, he had to talk to someone while he went to the bus terminal, sat on the bus. So someone has seen his face, someone has talked to him, and they just need to pick up the phone and call 911.
My last question for you here, how difficult will it be to pinpoint a motive? Because we've seen the messages that were reportedly written on some of the bullets. There's also other information that's slowly come in. Is it going to be fairly difficult to determine why this crime happened in the first place?
I think once they make a positive identification of the suspect or the person of interest, I think that will shed light on potential motive. Now, there has been a lot of speculation over the words that were written on the bullets. Of course, that could have been something he did to throw us off the scent, or that could be, in fact, something that was so important and so passionate to him that he needed that on that bullet to make a point, to make a statement. Because ultimately, I think with this going national, he knows he's going to get caught one day. And these words to him might have had significance. But I do think that we need to just be patient, because having an ID will allow us to then talk to the suspect to get an insight into his mind. But more importantly, even if he's ID'd and they don't capture him immediately, that will give the NYPD and all associated law enforcement agencies the capacity to then do a very deep dive into his background, who he is, his social media, who his friends are, his family, where he lives, where he works. That will then allow them to slowly piece together the motive for this crime.
Jillian Snider, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and break down all the latest. Is there anything else you want to add before I let you go?
No, again, I just want to be insistent. I'll repeat myself all day. If you know who this person is, or even if you think you know who this person is, you should be calling that tip in. And even if you're wrong, it will allow the NYPD and all other law enforcement agencies to then check it. Okay, that wasn't the person that we're looking for. But the NYPD really does need the public's help.
All right. Thank you again for being here with us, and have a great rest of your weekend.
You too. Thanks.